The mask of power. Have you ever wondered how someone can walk in the shadows, surround themselves with the most powerful people on earth, and still remain invisible to the world? How a name unknown to millions could be whispered in the corridors of presidents, billionaires, and kings? This is not a fairy tale, nor a conspiracy theory. It is a story about Jeffrey Epstein, a man who seemed to appear from nowhere, yet somehow placed himself at the very center of global power. To the outside world, he was a financier, a philanthropist, a man with private jets and private islands, a friend of scientists, politicians, and celebrities. He threw parties for the rich, funded research at elite universities, and lived a life most people could barely imagine. But beneath that polished mask was another story, one of lies, exploitation, and corruption. And the most terrifying part of his story is not just what he did, but how long he was able to do it. How many doors opened to him? How many people turned away? How silence protected him more than any fortress ever could. Epstein's rise was not about talent. It was not about genius. It was about illusion, the illusion of wealth, of access, of connections. He built a house of mirrors, and the world stepped inside without asking questions. And here is where the story becomes bigger than him. Because Epstein was not just one man, he was a symptom of how power protects itself, of how society often worships money so blindly that it refuses to see the truth. This story will not give you all the answers, because many of them are buried, sealed, or silenced forever. But it will give you a mirror in which you might see not only Epstein, but the system that allowed him to exist. So ask yourself, how does someone without a college degree, without a family fortune, climb into the circles of presidents and princes? How does someone who should have been exposed years earlier manage to survive in plain sight? And the harder question, how many others wear the same kind of mask right now? This is not a comfortable story, but then again, the truth rarely is. Lesson 1. The Illusion of Success. Jeffrey Epstein didn't come from privilege. He wasn't a Harvard graduate. He wasn't born into a dynasty of wealth. He started out in Brooklyn, in an ordinary family, with nothing that suggested he would one day mingle with billionaires and royalty. And yet, he managed to climb, not because he had brilliance in finance, but because he understood something far more powerful: appearances. In the 1970s, Epstein became a school teacher without even finishing college. He didn't have the proper degree, but he knew how to talk, how to impress, how to project confidence. Later, he used that same ability to talk his way into Wall Street. He worked at Bear Stearns, one of the most prestigious investment banks at the time, despite lacking the pedigree others considered essential. This was his gift, not genius, but persuasion. He built an image of himself as someone who belonged, someone important, someone who knew secrets others didn't, and people believed him. When he left Wall Street to start his own investment firm, there were few records, few real clients, and little evidence of enormous wealth under management. But the details didn't matter. What mattered was the aura. He rented private jets, bought lavish properties, surrounded himself with powerful people, and built a myth: Epstein, the mysterious financier. People rarely questioned where his money came from. They were blinded by the illusion. And this is the first lesson. Never trust the mask of success without asking what's behind it. How many times in history have we seen the same story? A man who speaks with confidence, flashes wealth, and earned trust simply because others assume no one so rich, no one so connected, could be a fraud. Epstein understood a simple truth about human psychology. If you look the part, people will stop asking questions. If you surround yourself with power, people will assume you have power. If you appear wealthy, people will want to believe you are. But here's the danger. Illusions are seductive, not just to others, but to ourselves. How many times have you met someone, seeing their car, their house, their followers on social media, and assumed they made it? How often do we confuse the appearance of success with the reality of substance? Epstein's empire was never about financial genius. It was about a performance, and the world, eager to be impressed, applauded without hesitation. The tragedy is not only that he fooled so many, it's that so many wanted to be fooled, because believing in the illusion was easier than confronting the truth. Lesson 1 is this: success that cannot be explained is not magic, it's a warning. Lesson 2: the web of power and money. If Lesson 1 showed us how Epstein built the mask of success, Lesson 2 reveals how he kept it in place, by weaving himself into a web of power so dense that removing him would mean shaking the entire structure. Epstein's genius wasn't finance, it was access. He surrounded himself with people whose names carried weight across the globe: presidents, prime ministers, scientists, billionaires, royalty. At one point, you could find him at dinners with Bill Clinton, conversations with Prince Andrew, or meetings with Nobel Prize-winning scientists at Harvard. He funded research, donated money, opened his homes to celebrities and politicians. He built an image not through what he created, but through who stood beside him. And here's the unsettling truth: those names gave him legitimacy. If powerful men and women accepted Epstein, then surely he must be someone important. If the world's elite trusted him, then why shouldn't everyone else? But power works both ways. By connecting himself to these circles, Epstein created a shield. The more powerful people he knew, the harder it became to question him. Who would dare expose him if exposure meant embarrassing not only Epstein, but also the people who had shared his tables, flown on his planes, stayed in his homes? This is the way influence protects itself, not through honesty or transparency, but through mutual silence. Think about it. In your own life, haven't you seen how connections often matter more than competence? How being part of the right circle can open doors closed to everyone else? Epstein mastered this principle at the highest level. It wasn't his wealth that gave him influence. It was his ability to make the powerful believe they needed him. And this is the second lesson. Money is not the ultimate currency. Access is. Access to people who make decisions. Access to rooms where the future is decided. Access to reputation strong enough to silence doubt. Epstein bought that access not always with cash, but with favors, introductions, donations, or simply the allure of being part of something exclusive. He created a club, and once you entered, it was hard to leave without questions being asked. This is why his mask stayed on for so long. He wasn't just Jeffrey Epstein, the man. He was Jeffrey Epstein, the reflection of everyone who stood beside him. And here lies the warning for us. When power and money intertwine, truth becomes the first casualty.
Lesson 3: the cracks in the mask. Every mask eventually cracks. For Jeffrey Epstein, the first cracks appeared long before the world truly saw them. In the early 2000s, disturbing reports began to surface. Whispers spread of young girls visiting his lavish mansions, of parties that felt less like gatherings of the elite and more like something darker. Journalists heard rumors, investigators heard testimonies, but time and time again, those cracks were plastered over. Why? Because the same web of power and money that Epstein had so carefully built also functioned as his shield. Police reports were filed, but prosecutors hesitated. Witnesses spoke, but their voices were drowned out. And when legal pressure mounted, Epstein deployed an army of high-priced lawyers, spinning settlements and agreements that buried accusations under paperwork. In 2005, one of the first major investigations began in Palm Beach, Florida. Parents complained, police gathered evidence, dozens of troubling accounts surfaced. It seemed, finally, the illusion might collapse. But then came the deal. A sweetheart plea bargain in 2008 that shocked even legal experts. Epstein pled guilty to minimal charges, served a short sentence under unusually lenient conditions, and walked free while many of the allegations disappeared into silence. How does this happen? How can someone accused of so much walk away almost untouched? The answer is not simply money, though money mattered. The answer is power. The names connected to Epstein, the influence he carried, created hesitation in the system itself. Prosecutors second-guessed, politicians looked the other way. Those tasked with protecting justice seemed to wonder, if we pull too hard on this thread, what else will unravel? This is the third lesson. When power protects itself, justice becomes negotiable. Think of how often this happens, not just with Epstein, but in society at large. A celebrity avoids consequences ordinary people would face. A corporation pays a fine instead of admitting guilt. A politician spins scandal into silence. The rules bend for those who stand close enough to the flame of influence. For Epstein, those cracks should have been the end. They should have revealed the truth. Instead, they became just another patch in the mask. The world moved on, the parties continued, the planes still flew, and the illusion, though weakened, survived. But masks can only hold for so long. Every time a crack is ignored, it grows deeper. Every time silence is chosen, the truth grows heavier. And one day, inevitably, it breaks. Lesson 3 reminds us, when the system looks away, it doesn't erase the crime. It only delays the reckoning.
Lesson 4. The Fall. For decades, Jeffrey Epstein lived behind a mask. The illusion of wealth, the illusion of power, the illusion of untouchability. But masks, no matter how carefully crafted, cannot last forever. In July 2019, the illusion collapsed. Epstein was arrested at a New Jersey airport after returning from Paris. The world watched as the man who had flown in private jets, dined with presidents, and thrown parties for the rich and famous was suddenly led into custody in handcuffs. For the first time, the mask slipped off in public, and what it revealed shocked even those who thought they knew. Prosecutors described years of exploitation, a network that stretched across continents, and victims whose voices had been silenced for too long. This wasn't just the fall of a man, it was the collapse of a myth. The financier, the philanthropist, the friend of the elite, all those roles evaporated under the weight of truth. But the fall was not as clean as it should have been. For even in prison, Epstein remained shrouded in mystery. His connections still loomed over the investigation. The question on everyone's mind was not only what did he do, but who else knew. And then, only weeks later, the story twisted again. Epstein was found dead in his cell, officially ruled a suicide, but surrounded by circumstances so suspicious that it only deepened the fog. Cameras that failed, guards who fell asleep, questions that multiplied instead of fading. The world reacted with outrage, disbelief, and a single refrain that echoed across headlines and hashtags: Epstein didn't kill himself. The details may never be fully clear, but here lies the lesson. When power is threatened, truth becomes slippery. It hides in shadows, escapes through cracks, and leaves us with only fragments. Epstein's death did not bring closure. It brought suspicion. It forced people to confront the uncomfortable idea that the systems we trust to deliver justice may not always be strong enough to stand against wealth and influence. And this is the fourth lesson. When truth collides with power, expect resistance. Because the higher someone climbs, the more people have a reason to keep them standing and to protect themselves when they finally fall.
Lesson 5. The lesson for us. The story of Jeffrey Epstein is not only about one man. It is about us, about the world we have built, the values we reward, and the illusions we choose to believe. For years, Epstein lived a double life. On the surface, wealth, influence, respect. Beneath it, corruption, manipulation, and crimes hidden in plain sight. And yet, the world let him continue. Why? Because people wanted to believe the illusion. Because society worships success, often without asking what it costs. This is the most uncomfortable truth. Epstein was possible, not because he was extraordinary, but because the system allowed him. He thrived in the gaps, where power shields power, where money buys silence, where appearances matter more than substance. And this is where the story turns toward us. How often do we fall for the same illusions? A business guru with a perfect image, but no real value. A politician who speaks well, but acts poorly. A celebrity who seems flawless until the truth leaks out. Again and again, we confuse the mask for the man. The lesson is not just beware of people like Epstein. The lesson is beware of the system that makes Epstein's possible. Because every time we reward appearances over integrity, every time we excuse corruption because it wears a nice suit, every time we choose silence because speaking up is uncomfortable, we contribute to the illusion. Epstein's death left many questions unanswered, but it also left us with a mirror showing how fragile truth becomes when it collides with power, a mirror reflecting our own tendency to look away, to stay comfortable, to protect the illusion. So what do? We ask harder questions. We refuse to be blinded by status. We remember that real success is not measured by private jets or mansions, but by integrity, honesty, and the impact left behind. Because the final lesson of Epstein's story is this: the greatest danger is not one man's corruption, but the silence of those who could have stopped him. The silence of colleagues, the silence of friends, the silence of a society that looked in wealth and turned away from truth. And so the question is not only about him, it is about us, about what we choose to see and what we choose to ignore. The mask will always exist. The real test is whether we dare to look behind it.